My name is Scott Kuykendall. I am the Water Resources Specialist for the McHenry County Department of Planning and Development. So I help oversee our scientific research into water resources. I help set public policy. I maintain our environmental compliance with the IEPA, and then I do public outreach and education like this. And we talk a lot about water on a variety of levels. And even though we're talking about native vegetation and rain gardens, all of our water resources are intertwined. So we get 100% of our drinking water from groundwater in McHenry County. And our groundwater is intertwined with our land use, and our land use is intertwined with our surface waters. So none of these is operating in isolation. They're all intertwined. So how we use the land affects all of our water resources, and so we want to highlight the best management practices that we can use to manage all of these things. And so this is part of a talk and tour series that's sponsored by the Environmental Defenders of McHenry County and the Department of Planning and Development. And this is our 5th program?
Yes.
So this is our 5th in the series. We have programs in September, October, and November as well. And so keep an eye out for those. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Just on behalf of the Environmental Defenders, I've got our new shirt on here with our new logos and a name drop on the sleeves. Anyway, you can buy these through Hyperstitch if anyone would like one, if you remember. Just wanted to welcome you here today on behalf of the Defenders. We so appreciate our partnership with McHenry County's Planning Department. It's wonderful for us, and I hope you guys feel the same way.
Absolutely.
Scott mentioned that, well, obviously we've been concerned about our water resources in the county for years and years. Those of you who are members of the Defenders know that we've been working to help protect and preserve our environmental resources in the county for 52 years now. So we have some of our summer newsletters over here, and guess what's on the back? A reminder of what Scott just told you, that we have more BMP workshops coming up. You can, I believe you can register for the upcoming ones with the addresses that are on the back. And you can also, in the center, of course, we just so happen to have a membership form. And we would love to have you all join us. I know a lot of people say, oh, I don't have time, I don't have time. Don't have to have time. Your membership dues help us keep the doors open. So please think about joining us and enjoy the program today.
Well, and I'll add on to that plug. So I'm a member of many national organizations that I'm very proud to be a part of. But one of the, I was just talking about part of the reason I moved back to McHenry County is because we have institutions that really care about our environment. We have open spaces here that nobody else really has in the region. And we have local organizations that really make a difference. And so the work that the Defenders does is visible. All these national organizations I belong to are doing wonderful things, and I read about them, but I don't necessarily see what's being done. With the work that the Defenders are doing and other organizations, you physically see the benefits. And so supporting an organization like the Defenders really makes a big difference in the county. And they are tremendous partners. When we're talking about a rain garden, we're not talking about a pond. And I think that's one distinction that we really need to make sure we understand. This is not supposed to be a pond that holds water permanently. What we're trying to do is put water back in the ground. Before we settled the area and compacted the soils and paved over everything, water, when it rained or snow melt, would infiltrate down through the ground. It would slowly percolate down, recharge our groundwater aquifers. But water just doesn't sit still. It's constantly moving. It's following the topography of the land for the most part. And it's providing a base flow of cool, clean water to our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. And that cool, clean water supports a stable environment. When we pave over things or compact the soils, that water is no longer able to infiltrate down. It hits the ground surface, rushes off, and it picks up any pollutants that it comes in contact with. And it rushes into our lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands, creates a flood stage, followed by drought, flood, drought, flood, drought. So instead of a base flow of cool, clean water, it's extreme environment. And very few things can survive in such extreme environments. So we really want to restore that natural hydrology. The other thing that we're doing when we restore that natural hydrology is we're reducing the pressure from flooding. And when we pave over everything, we're increasing the volume of water that's running overland. And that contributes to the flooding that we're experiencing. On top of that, we've had a steady increase in the amount of precipitation that we've been getting. And as a result of global warming, we're getting more precipitation, but we're getting it fewer and fewer events. So when we do get rainfalls, we're getting more and more extreme rain events. A 6-inch storm was unheard of years ago. Now it's a fairly common occurrence. Our built environment is not built for that extreme. So how are we going to adapt our built environment to manage this increased runoff and increased stormwater? And that's one of the biggest tools that we're going to have in our toolbox, is putting it back in the ground. And so native vegetation by nature is deep rooted. So our turf grass, although it has its place in our built environment, we don't need it everywhere. Turf grass, the root systems are really only about an inch or two down. In our native vegetation, the roots are going down 5, 10, 15 feet. And that creates a network of roots and healthy soils. And those healthy soils act as a sponge. And it will hold a tremendous amount of water. It will promote infiltration, recharging those groundwater aquifers that we need for our drinking water. It evapotranspires water, and it is providing wildlife habitat while it's providing all these functions. And so, our native vegetation integrated into our built environment can have a tremendous influence on the quality of life that we all enjoy. And so rain gardens are one of the tools, and when we talk about rain gardens, we can often lump in a variety of different types of best management practices that can be called infiltration basins, where they're more structured, where there'll be concrete sidewalks basically with recessed islands that will hold water. And you'll see those on sidewalks in urban areas. It's providing the same function as a more traditional type of rain garden. A bioswale with a sewer, it's a gray concrete pipe, and we refer to that as gray infrastructure. Its purpose is to convey water from point A to point B. And a bioswale is a form of rain garden that provides that conveyance from point A to point B, but it's also allowing infiltration to occur, recharging our groundwater. It's cleaning the water as it passes through, because the water is interacting with the soils and vegetation, getting cleaned as it moves through. It's providing habitat for our native pollinators. Our native pollinators and our native plants evolve together, so they need each other. And then it's providing aesthetic beauty, as we'll see today. So you're getting all these benefits, whereas stormwater, storm sewer, although it has its place, it's only providing that one function. And we can also design the bioswales to hold a significant more amount of water, and therefore helping to mitigate flooding. So all these benefits on top of providing conveyance from point A to point B. So when we're talking about rain gardens, it really can encompass a lot of different things. And so we're very fortunate to have an engineer with us today. Brian Valesky is with Geosyntec. And Geosyntec and Brian are people that I consider to be very high caliber in their field. And I needed to, one of the obstacles I ran into with this program is we lost a lot of the people that were directly involved to retirement. So they're now very busy doing other things, but aren't directly involved in the field that they were doing. So when I needed somebody that really knew what he was doing, I reached out to Brian, and he was gracious enough to put a program together for us. So Brian will give a talk about rain gardens in somewhat broader terms, and then Amy Olson will give a talk about this project that we're going to be looking at, and then Jeff Fiorina with the Park District will talk about management of those resources, because there's no such thing as maintenance free. Whether it's concrete, asphalt, or a native garden, everything needs maintenance. And so it's very important that we don't just have the perception that we can put these in and forget about them. You need to go into it committed to doing it right, and then budget for maintenance into the future. And there are a variety of ways that can be done.
Yeah, well, Scott says all those nice things about me. The thing is he knew that I just lived down the street, and I wouldn't say no. It'd be pretty hard to say no. So, yeah, I think what's important too is, in this area, northern Kane and McHenry County, we have a much more a porous situation than a lot of the rest of this I'll just say suburbs and metro Chicago area. Our water is meant to infiltrate here. Those other areas, it's a little more prone to runoff, regardless of the concrete and pavement. So trying to restore that natural component is more critical here than anywhere, because our natural ecosystem was eventually built on that environment. So what I'm going to try to focus on a little bit today is more of what are the nuts and bolts of an actual, we're talking about rain gardens, but when you actually talk about these things, the engineers, we tend to cross over in this world, we like to use the word bioretention. So like rain gardens, a lot of times, it's just a matter of scale, sorry. It's a matter of scale, really. So when we build it in our yard, and it's getting like gutter drainage, a lot of times we'll call that a rain garden. It's more of like your your single yard application. I think what we're going to look at today, even if we're calling it a rain garden, some people might refer to it as a bioretention area. It's more of an engineered, dual purpose type of practice that allows for a little more of a ecological impact for the groundwater outside of a rain garden. So what are we dealing with when we talk about these things? Well, a rain garden versus a bioretention area. Well, what's the importance that you're looking to do? If we're capture rainwater, we want to get it into the ground. We want to be some of us, right? This is our drinking water, right? So it should be clean when it gets into the groundwater, right? That's kind of our goal. And also to infiltrate it, restore that natural ecology. Dirty water doesn't do anyone any good. So when we talk about like a rain garden, there's really no pre-treatment. Water coming off your roof is considered clean, right? There's no impact, it hasn't intercepted anything. So it's generally pretty clean when you put it in the ground. When we're intercepting water that comes off of a parking lot per se, that doesn't necessarily come into the system clean, right? It's going to be carrying some petroleum-based products. In the winter, it may be carrying some sand constituents and even chlorides. So what do we do to try to offset that? Well, there's not necessarily a perfect answer for the salts, but the actual bioretention, there's an actual, and we'll talk about the layers of the facility or the rain garden or the bioretention area next, but there's an actual bacterial component to this where there's actually bacteria in the top layer that helps capture that petroleum-based products and helps break it down before it actually gets into the groundwater table. What we're trying to show here is the state of Illinois, BMPs are used for to create that certain environment. What I'm trying to get at here is that, and you can't really see this that well, here's one in a much more urbanized environment, but there's an actual science to this. So the state of Illinois does not have the same guidance as some other states have, but there's other states that actually require you to go through a sizing process for this. So like that system that's out there that you're going to look at, it's generally, you can't just stick a ton of water into a tiny little spot and expect it to get you any return, right? So there's an actual engineering process going into this where we look at how much of space you have to work with and how much water you can actually assume that it will take on. A stormwater system to trap stormwater rainfall is generally built for what we call the 100-year storm. What is the 100-year storm? A bioretention cell is generally capturing a 2-year event at the max, or something like a standard, like a half an inch of rain. After that, the rest of it it's an overflow. It goes over to your storm sewer. But typically, most of the rainfall we get that is packed in with all of the sediment, the nutrients, and the petroleum-based products. It all gets washed off your pavement within the first quarter to half-inch rain anyway. So the goal is to capture that. What I think a lot of people refer to it as the first flush is a designed actual calculation, and then once that gets collected, the sense is the rest of it is already so dilute, it's going down the system anyway. So there's just kind of that idea. This is actually one of those treatment areas right here. This is in downtown St. Louis. You can see how urbanized this is versus something you might see over here, where they're literally busting up existing concrete and putting these systems in. But there's an actual mathematical computation to determine, to make sure you don't overload these systems. I think I want to say 15 years ago, I remember I was working on a project. This was some of the first green infrastructure I actually was seeing getting built. It was in kind of DuPage County, that transition area between Cook County and the civil engineers were getting their hands on this stuff. And they had a rain garden that was about half the size of this pavilion. And they had a 36-inch pipe coming into it. And I said, guys, I just don't think this is going to work. I can't remember if it actually got built that way or not. But people really struggled with that concept. Everyone was hyper-focused on, this was a new thing. Everybody wanted to do it. But the science wasn't quite there yet, or they hadn't picked it up yet. But there's an actual sizing process to go through to make sure your BMP not only functions, but lasts. And I just had on here, because this is kind of jargon here, this is a term I think Wisconsin uses, call it a facility area ratio. The max is 20:1. This is the recommended, and basically that means for every 10, let's just say every foot of area I have for the rain garden, I don't want to exceed 20 areas, 20 equal units of runoff space. And that generally depends, are you doing a parking lot, or are you doing, something that's actually got some grass or something in it? Because the more impervious space you have, as Scott mentioned, the more volume of water you're putting into your rain garden. So.
What does that mean? Like a half an inch to 2 years?
2 years. So this is like, okay, if I just go to my rain gauge, right, in the morning after, and I say, we got a half inch of rain, right? That's the old school way of doing it. We also use so when I design a stormwater detention facility, I'll have like a 100-year storm. That equates to 8 inches of rain, I think, nowadays. I know we just recalculated our rainfall values.
We actually had to change the numbers that we used to calculate the 100-year storm because the precipitation amounts have changed.
Because of climate change. So a 2-year, this is referring to what we call a 2-year storm. And typically we call that a 2-year 24-hour storm. I think in this area it's right around 4 inches, 3.5 inches maybe. Okay. I'd have to go back and check the number, but that just kind of shows you we're not trying to hold water. We're talking about more frequent returns. So every time it rains, this thing is meant to do its job. A detention pond like that, really, it's doing its job, but really it only has to perform once in every 100 years, but what's 100 years now, right? Seems like we get that all the time,
it's
right?
More frequent. And it's a little off track, but put it in a little context. Most storms historically used to be half-inch storms, and with a rain garden, a rooftop green roof, they're typically designed to hold that half-inch storm. So like in the city of Chicago, where they have combined sewers, they're trying to find any way possible to reduce the volume of water reaching their sewer system so that it doesn't overwhelm the systems. And so green roofs are actually really important in a place like Chicago. And so they're designed, there are different ways to do it. You can design them to carry more, but typical extensive green roofs are designed to hold a half-inch rain. And so you can kind of picture what a half-inch rain may be, if a roof can hold it.
Real quick here, so this is another important thing. This goes back to that discussion we had about McHenry County being, a much more permeable place. The water gets into the ground a lot faster. We rely on clean groundwater here more than some other parts of the metro area. But essentially, this kind of underlies. This is called a textural triangle. This harkens back to the days of soil science, but basically what we're trying to say here is clay versus sand. We have a lot higher sand fraction here in McHenry County. It's conducive to infiltration. We don't have to force it as much here, but it's still, you don't want to get water in too fast, otherwise it doesn't do the cleaning function we want it to do. So around here, we don't have to necessarily do that. Other areas where you actually have to look into this, you actually want to verify that when you put the water in the system, it's going to get back into the ground. So there are other areas where they actually test the actual native sand. So when we scoop out this thing, so like that bioretention area out there, they probably excavated some 2 feet down, maybe 30 inches to build this reservoir. So it's an underground reservoir, and to put the sand back in there. Okay, so it's all great when you fill up that reservoir, but how long is it going to take for that water to actually get into that subsoil which eventually gets the water into the ground, which gets it back to the groundwater table. It's important to not force it. So if you have a ton of clay, well, guess what? Your rain garden is not going to function potentially as well as you may want it to. So that may cause it to overflow, or maybe it's just a bad place for a rain garden. So what we have here is kind of a rendering to kind of show the components of an actual rain garden opened up, and it's going to be hard to see from that distance. But these are all things that we put into this, and so it's an engineered system, right? So water comes in, it goes through this media, it goes through the plant layer, and then actually through this gravel. We call it a reservoir sometimes. So think of this thing as it's excavated out, right? You're going to fill, if it's 30 inches deep or 24 inches deep, there's what we call a reservoir. And before you even put anything in it, you're going to have like a non-woven barrier, right? So you're going to have a barrier on this system that basically keeps the material from basically clogging the drainage, right? This material keeps the water from mixing in the soil, the subsoil, from mixing into your stone. So essentially this whole thing here, there is a barrier fabric, and you can buy this fabric at Menards, at Home Depot. I mean, it's just a non-woven black fabric. And then there's this reservoir down here. Now this area is meant to store water and slowly allow it to trickle into it. So water comes in, it's going to go through this media. Now the media, you go on the internet and you can see, you know, like Baskin Robbins, 51 different flavors on how to make this media. But it's typically an organic matter mixed with a sandy material and then put back on here to gives the plants something to grow in. So it's rich enough with nutrients to allow the plants to grow in it, but still porous enough to let the water get through it into this. Now you'll have another barrier fabric separating this media right here from that reservoir. Again, that's to keep the particles from getting down into this reservoir. And then the top here, which is kind of shown with this curb and gutter, is the maximum amount of water this thing can hold, at which point it would start to overflow into this system. So, I mean, we're talking about a lot of different layers here, but it's like a cake, really. It's just a bunch of different layers. Gets into that, and then this outflow goes into the sewer. So this sewer is only activated once you get above that threshold point. We talked about whether it's a half-inch of rain or it's a 2-year storm. This thing is sized to handle those littler storms. If it's done correctly and it's sized correctly, it's only going to overflow when that threshold is breached, right? So all these half inches, quarter inches, they would never do that. So if I get a rainstorm here and it's on Randall Road, right? You get a quarter inch of rain, a tenth of an inch of rain, guess what? That's running on a gutter, it's going into all that stuff is loaded full of whatever is coming off of these vehicles, right? In this situation, this here, all these cars that are parked out here on the parking lot, they're all dropping stuff, right? All the time. That's going to go through that rain garden, and that rain garden is going to have the first shot at capturing that stuff and cleaning it before it gets into Woods Creek. Well, it's going to the creek, right? Woods Creek, it's just called Woods Creek. And then the Woods Creek Reservoir, which is in Lake in the Hills, right? So you're getting that first flush, you're capturing it, you're collecting those pollutants, rather than it just washing down the road into the sewer and being ejected into the lake. So, but this just meant to show all kind of that cross-section of layers. You start at the bottom and you just build your way up. And this depth that we're trying to show here, this is variable. Sometimes it's 30 inches, sometimes you may not have that kind of depth. It was mentioned you could have groundwater issues, in which case if you've got a high groundwater table, you either have a really shallow system or you need to reconsider whether or not that's an appropriate best management practice for the spot.
And we won't get in, we'll talk about this in a later slide, but you can see the vegetation. Depending on how much water that is going to hold and how quickly that water will draw down, dictates the type of plants that you can plant. So you can't just go get a plant list off the internet and expect those plants to do well. You really need to tailor your plant selection to each site depending on the hydrology and the soils that you have. It's critical to having these things done right. But we'll talk more about that. While we had the visual up here, I wanted to kind of plant that seed, so to speak.
So anyway, so what I have here is actually a snapshot out of the Wisconsin Rakarga model. This is what they actually use to design their infiltration systems. And I like it because it actually shows you the inputs that you're putting into this model. Now you don't have to use this necessarily unless you're doing work in the state of Wisconsin, but it does a great job of showing you, okay, here's the input, this is the infiltration rate, same thing, here's the type of media I'm using, this is, and it basically will actually calculate based on the amount of drainage area in there, how long it's going to take for this thing to run down, how big a under drain you need in it if you want it to draw down faster, gives you all these kind of, and if people are really, you can download this for free off the DNR's website. It's just a tool that kind of helps us size a system appropriately and responsibly. We don't want to design systems that fail. And there's actually a lot of thought and academic science that goes in between done this, not just by the University of Wisconsin, but a lot of Big Ten schools and a lot of schools nationally. So.
Is that it?
Yeah, and here's your, this is your black fabric, nothing special. This is what your reservoir stone could look like. And you can buy this stuff at bags at the Home Depot too. It's just your basic round wash stone.
Well, and Brian had mentioned this, but the crushed stone, so like when we've got permeable pavers that has crushed stone underneath it, there is bacteria that is bonded with the crushed stone, and that is actually eating, those microorganisms are eating the pollutants as the water is sitting there or filtering through. So each stage of the system is providing water quality benefits as well as storage.
All right, so there's nothing really to see here. This is really just a plant list, and this kind of belabors what Scott was already talking about with depth, except when I gave this to somebody, they took this for a program we're doing with MWRD. It's actually got salt tolerance on here, general height, deer resistance, which is a thing. And whether or not it's a pollinator species, but they also have tables that also will tell you like depth of water exposure to a rooting system, because if you want when you build, like even for a detention pond or for a rain garden, those areas that are going to stay wetter longer, they got to be able to tolerate it, otherwise it's going to drown the plant. So the ones up top, typically on the top of the edge, they may be more of what we would call a prairie species, and then the ones that are down there would be more of what we would refer to it as emergent or edge type of species. So this one again doesn't really talk about the plant depth, it's more of height, but it shows you that they're actually cater to try to give you the specificity you need to build a rain garden with these things in mind.
Question here.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
How do you keep Phragmites and reed canary grass out of your garden?
Well, that's actually what this next slide is. Maintenance. If you don't keep it, ultimately it will look like this. And those of you who don't know, this is teasel here. This is a good friend of a lot of people's. Phragmites is another one of those. Now Phragmites has different problems. My understanding is Phragmites basically actually emits like a toxin out of its root system, which allows it to break down the other plants from growing there. I'll tell you, it is probably one of the most challenging plants. I'm not a plant ecologist or a botanist, but most of the people tell me that it is one of the toughest and most persistent things they've worked on. Now there's all kinds of interesting things that they're trying to do with Phragmites about bundling it, turning it into fuel, which may make other uses for it, but that's a whole nother topic maybe for another day. But for right now, going back in there, weeding, maintaining it, sometimes it's burning, but a lot of times if you've got like your own little rain garden right in your house, you're not going to have someone maintain that. That is your own, that you're going to go in there, you're going to weed that sucker, but you shouldn't be getting Phragmites in a rain garden at home either. So that's a different scale, different issue altogether.
Well, and so this is an important thing to talk about, and Phragmites is actually one of the things I did want to talk about. We'll get into it a little bit later, but we'll go ahead and get the seed planted. So maintenance is a huge part of any of these types of systems, and this is true if you're doing a turf to native type of thing. You need to have people who know their plants, and that's often tough to do if you're doing it with a small organization. In Boy Scouts back in the day, they would teach kids the plants. I don't think that's taught anymore. The only reason I learned is actually from work, on the job training, learning every day. But if you are a municipality and you're having these types of rain gardens done for the municipality, you're going to be putting out an RFP, request for proposals. What you need to start doing is having performance standards tied to the project. So, how do you measure success? And so you've got a plant list, you've got a maintenance plan for 3 to 5 years, and you have performance standards that have to be met. And typically that's, a certain percentage of the plants that have been installed have to be, survive. No more than X percent will be non-native weedy species. Now we'll see, Queen Anne's lace is a non-native species, but it's not that problematic. So you don't need to worry that much. Your performance standards can allow for a certain percentage of non-native plants, but none of the species shall be invasive. And that's where Phragmites would come in. So whoever is establishing this, will need to make sure that Phragmite doesn't take hold. When we talk about managing for invasive species, a common phrase is early detection, early eradication. So the sooner you get in there and identify it and take care of it, the smaller the problem is going to be, and it'll be, negligible cost. But if you let it get out of hand, particularly Phragmites, I consider Phragmites a monster because it is just so aggressive. It's salt tolerant and it can choke out all kinds of native species. I've done work on gravel pits where you've got a little depressional hole where the Phragmites starts, and I've literally seen it sends runners out, so it spreads through runners. I've seen it where it goes 200 feet up a hill of dry sand and takes over the entire hill. So Phragmites is a monster, but cattails are not necessarily a desirable species. Reed canary grass is a problem. There are a lot of invasive species that cause a problem. So, if you're a municipality and you're doing things, we need to start having performance standards, and that way, when Jeremy's out there doing his inspections, he can say it's not meeting standards, and the contractor then has to take care of it. And that puts the contractor on notice. They're not going to go after the project if they don't know how to do it. And so it's a way of ensuring that you're getting a qualified company to do the work. And so it's really an important part of this. But if it's a small organization and you're using staff, you're going to have a slower process of learning what the plants are. But it's all part of the process. My brother sending me photos is this a weed? That's part of the maintenance program. And so, in any case, maintenance is critical. But there, as we lower that learning curve, or flatten that learning curve, the better we're all going to be at this.
Canadian goldenrod just a no-no, or just kind of maintain?
So Canada goldenrod, that would be one that I, wouldn't be that aggressive with, but it can take over. So the Queen Anne's lace, goldenrod, all these other things are considered old field plants, and they can be pretty aggressive. And but that, once again, if you have somebody who knows what they're doing, they can identify it, and that's fairly easy to take care of. And it's you just make sure that what you planted gets established, and it'll hold its own.
So some of these prices that are on here, this is meant to be kind of like your own personal rain garden. That's not what it's going to cost to construct that thing out there, and I can tell you that right now. That's probably on the order of $8,000 to $12,000 just for that. Well, it's again, if you're building a rain garden, you're not going typically as deep. That's probably excavated to 2.5 feet minimum. That's just to put down the bedding and all that stuff that goes with it, to get the grades, just to get the depth. Now, when it comes to maintenance too, most people that I've seen, they struggle with the first couple years, and that's essentially getting those native plants to take. There's a competition period there. It's getting that grade to kind of adjust. You're going to always, you fill up something like this, you're almost always going to see a little sinkage. That's natural as the soil settles, right? It gets wet, it gets saturated, water goes up and down in there. It'll actually be a little bit of sinkage, so you may have to go back in there, invigorate that with some more media. And then if there's any trouble spots you want to know, it's tougher to solve a situation in parking lot sometimes than it is here. It'll be a little bit different than that situation. So you just have to watch that. But typically what we think for the first couple years, you want to set aside about 10 to 15% of your total construction costs. in order to just plan for what that might be. Biggest issue is usually plant mortality. But this is, so what you're going to see, a lot of what I have are like heavily urbanized areas, but these are the areas that you could argue need them the most, right? So here's what it looked like before. This is downtown St. Louis, a little lower income area, and a lot of these are post-construction, so they're not, the plants aren't really up yet. But you can see that an area like this can be repurposed for something like this to get that water quality benefit, even in a very heavily overgrown and urbanized area. So, and I've got a bunch of them. I don't know if we want to go through them, but
I think this. I could look at these things all day, to be honest. I love looking at.
But I want to put this in context of what we're going to look at right now. So obviously this wasn't like this. They built that with that intention, but essentially this is what we're trying to do in some of these heavily urbanized areas, is be able to recapture and clean that water. So this is an actual rendering of what that looks like. Now personally, I don't have the aesthetic eye that others people have, but I would rather look at that than look at that. So, and I'm not talking about the van. All right.
Well, and think about if this was integrated into urban environment in many places, the amount of water quality benefit that could be derived as opposed to just a flush of hot, dirty water. This would reduce the loading of pollutants significantly in that area. So this provides a wide variety of benefits.
And Scott brings up a good point, because in certain areas of the world, the temperature of water is very important. Now you get onto the West Coast, there's actually areas of Wisconsin where this is important. Trout habitat, salmon habitat. The heat effect of the water running off the parking lot is significant. So rather than just running it off of a hot parking lot into a concrete pipe where it sees no relief, this helps it cool off before it gets back into that surface water. So that's a very helpful impact in certain areas where they really need it. This is another version of the same thing. This is a little more linear, but same idea. Here, here's your basic right of way, right? Sidewalk, grass patch to the road. And then that same concept here with an open, so just so people get the idea, we don't create these systems to like in their own world, right? They're meant to serve the same function as the traditional storm sewer system, right? They're doing the same thing that we would be doing with our hard infrastructure, only we'd like to think they're doing it better.
And so, you can see.
So you can see that manhole in here, there's that storm sewer function. They may have taken it off the road, and here's a concrete opening in the gutter. So the water, instead of going down the drop inlet that's, in a gutter, goes into this, and then this becomes the outfall after it's had this chance to be cleansed by the system.
And this may be then the municipality is able to use that as their for their MS4 permit. And just here's kind of a more cross-sectional view where you can actually see the constructed material underneath and how it's functioning. So this is not necessarily providing that groundwater infiltration that we were talking about, but it is providing water quality treatment before it goes into the storm sewer.
And this is, for the people who are curious, this black and white drawing, this is what the guys actually used to construct it. So they're not looking at a pretty picture. The pretty picture is for educational purposes, but this is what, the guy who's driving the steam shovel or the backhoe, this is what those guys are using to build it. It's got all the call outs in it, what the layers are meant to do, some of the sizes. I'm surprised we don't have dimensioning on here, but calls it out so they know what they need when they go into the field to construct it.
Do these things die? Like you get so many contaminants, they eventually die?
Well, it's like anything. Like if I put out a catch basin or a curb, that curb gets ripped out in 20 years. How often do you see them repave Randall Road? These things all have lifetimes. So it doesn't matter.
On these things.
And that's the nice thing about having that confining fabric at the end. They'll excavate out and they can actually take the fabric, and it creates that nice area of separation. They can pull it out and they can drop it right back in there. I mean, it still work, right? They still have to get it in there and they have to scoop it all out. But I don't know. There's actually been studies on, how stuff accumulates, not necessarily in rain gardens, more in detention ponds. It is an interesting study. I don't know if I've seen stuff that really talks about, like, is it contaminated or not. I tell you what, I've seen some of the stuff coming off the tollways in some of the lakes, and that stuff has not surprisingly come back contaminated. So I don't know if it's flushed through the system or where it is, but nothing glowing yet.
Great, thank you. So I want to give you a little bit of scale to where we're at here at Woods Creek. Thank you very much for coming to Woods Creek, our park here. We're this little tiny blue spot right up here, and this is the whole Woods Creek watershed I've outlined. And I'll pass this around in a second. And our land, we actually have Willow's Edge Park up along the way over here, but we only own about 3% of land within this whole watershed. So we're small potatoes. Just so think about your house and your neighborhood. Every little small place, every little rain garden has a big impact. And the more small things that we can do to connect and improve our water, the better. And to also give you an idea of how the watershed works, this watershed goes from west to east. And so these two end parts, you know, we're right up here. They come down into Woods Creek Lake, and then they feed into the Fox River. So I'll pass these around so you guys can look at how the scale is for this park. This land was given to the Park District by the developer in 1990. You know, all the houses, you know, everyone's moving out to the suburbs, and all that land is being taken up, but part of the requirements for them, for the developer was to donate land to the Park District. And at the time, the developer was required to widen the creek. It was just a little creek that ran through here, and they widened it into a pond. They had to take away all the, take down the non-native invasive trees and plant a nice native prairie edge along the creek, or now the pond. And the developer also built a pathway around the pond. The Park District then, in collaboration with about 900 volunteers that Ann and her friend Linda led, they built a playground, 900 volunteers to build a playground. That's pretty intensive. I mean, to get that much support for the community to build a playground for the park. Otherwise, you can visualize this was probably just cleared, just top dressed with a little soil and seed and let to be turf, you know, an open lot. In the next 18 years, other improvements came. The shelters were built, the clubhouse, little bathroom facility, a tennis court was added, a basketball court, sand volleyball courts, and then in around 2012, 2013, yeah, sorry, generation there, the master plan was developed, and they went out and received an OSLAD grant, and the grant was for $1.2 million. And, the project cost was $1.2 million. OSLAD grants usually around $400-ish thousand, so the Park District saved up and allocated some money to develop the park. And at that time, they developed the splash pad, and they renovated the playground with a whole new playground. And the playground, what's really interesting about the splash pad and the playground, and they expanded the parking lot at that time, they added another tennis court, is that here's our splash pad, here's our playground. All this, we have think about your stormwater system with the streets and stuff. We have stormwater system here. The splash pad is fresh water, and normally you turn on your faucet, that water just goes down the drain, goes into the sewer system, goes into the city cleaning process, and then maybe it recirculates back, maybe it becomes gray water. Here we're capturing that fresh water. At the time, this was state of the art. I mean, park districts weren't doing this back, back in 2012, 2013. It was not common then. So think about all the water that's being used in a fun way. But it's a lot of water, and how can we reuse and capture that water without just letting it flush down the drain? So the water splash play is actually hand press activated. So the children have to activate it. It's not on all the time, and then it circulates through the system. And that water then is collected in the splash pad, and it's directed in two different directions. One direction, along with the playground area, the water when it rains is collected, and it goes into that. There's a gravel outflow area that looks like a little stream, and actually has become such an important play feature for the children that you often see more kids playing in with the boulders where it rushes through, and we have a little bit of a problem maintenance wise in that they tend, it flows down the stream here and it goes into an inlet, and they tend to clog the pipes. So we're always having to clean out the pipes because the kids think, oh, let's clog it up so we can fill the whole area up more. And I'm like, no, it's got to flow,
Future engineers.
Exactly.
I know, it's so fun. And then the water goes under the pathway and it collects. And we also have 2 storm sewers on the parking lot. So we're also, collecting stormwater when it rains and bringing it in and into the island here, but eventually into the far island over there, which we'll walk to, where it is filtered out. We actually have a detail here for the gentleman who wants to see the detail of how it was constructed. But and we have a full landscape plan here, but there's piping so that it all collects here. And again, the whole idea is to hold and capture the water. Rain gardens, bioswales, the idea is to hold the water in your land so you can let it percolate down, and so it doesn't rush into the system so fast and overextend the system. That's where we have a lot of problems with our systems are built. Now that we're having bigger rain events, our systems are being tapped out much quicker. In my own backyard, the first thing I did was I put in a huge French drain. It's probably 16 by 12 by, 6 feet deep. I borrowed a bobcat, dug it out. It was a lot of fun. And, the little steps that each house can do, it adds and makes an impact. So here, we've created this really nice rain garden, and because we're reusing all that water that would normally just go into the storm sewer, we're then watering the plants and allowing that water to filtrate into the system, and then hopefully it percolates back into the ground, to the stream, goes down, and we really bring in some nice clean water into the Fox River eventually.
I'm John Fiorina, so I'm big long title, Manager of Natural Resources and Interpretive Services for the Crystal Lake Park District. Unlike Amy, I've been here for about 23 years. Woods Creek was a park before I got here, but I can tell you some stuff if you got questions about that as well. My job consists of taking care of natural areas within the park district. The park district has 42 parks, 42 properties, roughly 1,400 acres. Yeah. Guess how many full-time people we have taking care of the landscaping? 2. And that includes the natural areas. Valerie over here is our grounds manager. So she oversees the 2 as well as our mowers and all of our other grounds folks. Maintenance on this thing. Who was pointing out that know what your weeds are? That I can't say enough about it. One of the things that, again, I started in '99. When I first started, my boss would be, who's no longer around, be like, "Hey, just put in some wildflowers and we won't have to maintain it. It'll be easy," right? So that was the misconception. You put in native plantings, they're maintenance free, it's great, and it'll be wildflowers all over the place. That is not the case. It's not the case. We are getting close, we're pretty close to low maintenance as we can get on landscaping at this park in one spot. There's still a lot of work going on, but our maintenance level is definitely decreasing. I'll point out a little more when we get out there. Also, I'm just going to say that some of these people took a lot of the really, really clever things I was going to say. I'll point out some of the issues that we've got specific to this one. This landscape drawing is what we are. This is my friend. I'm Carol Merrill. This is what we have for our landscape plan. It was researched. I'm sure that nice chart that shows us what all is going to grow where was used. Those were planted. Most of that is native. Not everything is. Not everything I would have put in, but we get what we get. The native plants, kind of like toddlers, you can tell them to stay there, but they're moving. That would be one of the bigger pieces of advice I can give you on maintaining these. Know what your weeds are, know which weeds are going to be a problem, but also accept the fact that it's not going to be these nice little neat circles as you go forward. One of the ways, and Valerie was more, I was more like consultant on this. Valerie and her crew have been working on this since actually Valerie started.
Yeah, since 2015, 16.
Yeah, so Valerie came in right after the Raingardens were installed. What we did was we saw what died, we saw what was flourishing, we saw what moved where, and then we repeated that. Shoestring budget, yeah, we don't, here's $10,000, go top off all of our rain gardens. We don't get that. So what we were able to do is, again, Valerie and her crew say, hey, we've got some Rudbeckia, brown-eyed Susan, over at this park. Let's take some of that, because that seems to be doing really well here. The switchgrass is happy as can be. It's moving everywhere. Joe Pye weed's doing well. So that's what it's been. It's been kind of a learning curve for our grounds crew. I get it. We have done both. In fact, we're going to try and throw some seed in there. Valerie and I were talking earlier this week. We're going to try and throw some seed in some low areas that are missing some veg. So it's a lot of hit or miss for us. Scott had talked about performance standards. If you go across the street, that's Fetzner Park. We just had a project done. There's a bunch of invasives. They cleared the creek. We really upset some of the neighbors. Unless you live over there, everybody was thrilled. We upset a lot of neighbors. It looks 100% better. We did that, how long ago was that? About 4 years? About 4 years ago. This time we contracted the installer, the company, I think it's AEK. AES, Applied Ecological Services. They got the contract and they're doing monitoring for us. They have included prescribed burns. That's huge for us. Yeah, tell me about it. So if you remember, I said Manager of Natural Resources and Interpretive Services. I oversee the Nature Center and Colonel Palmer House as well. The Nature Center happens to have this thing that we call field trip season, which is about, I don't know, anywhere from 50 to 150 kids every day throughout spring coming to the Nature Center, and we teach them. Guess when prescribed burn season is? During field trip season. Prescribed burn season is also one of the times when our grounds people are extremely busy. So they're moving around a lot, they're getting everything ready. So being able to do a lot of this stuff is really challenging. These rain gardens kind of fall in that same area, and one of the things that I'm going to point out when we get over there is planning those things out so that you can burn them if that's an option for you. Ann Viger had to petition the city because we have an ordinance that we're supposed to have evergreens. Guess what fire does to evergreens? It doesn't even have to hit them, it just has to be close to them and you brown it out and it dies. So taking that kind of thing into consideration when you're installing is huge. Skeleton crew for us when we're doing prescribed burns, if I could have run in here, give the torch to someone, have them walk around in a circle and let it burn, we'd be done in 20 minutes. 30, because we'd probably use the restrooms because that's a luxury we don't get every place. With the way this is currently designed, with a lot of woodies in there, so there's a couple of beautiful river birch, we have to protect those overflows. Those melt. Don't ask me how I know, but those melt, okay? We have to go in and protect those. So it just adds to the amount of maintenance that you have to have. As you're designing those, take that into consideration, especially if you're a municipality. talk to the people that are going to be out there working them, and see what they have to say. That's why Ann ended up getting the, I think it was a variance or something on the ordinance to not put those evergreens in, because I spent way too much time protecting evergreens. This right here should be a pretty easy thing to burn. And does anybody know the design company that did this? Good. So I met the guy who designed this. It was his first project, and he told me how embarrassed he was because of the way it turned out. Full-size evergreens planted in and amongst it, maples, all those trees that like to die with fire. Take that over there. I will apologize, I do jump around a bit. When it comes to maintenance over here again, I mentioned the landscape plan and how it's not all going to stay, you know, nice and fancy and all like a traditional landscaping. One of the things that has helped us here is Valerie again and her crew have tackled this more like a traditional landscaping, with the understanding that this is going to do what I would call naturalizing. So that's where it starts getting a little bit shaggy here and there, as opposed to a traditional landscaping where you have your nice edge, groups of 1s, 3s, 5s, and 7s, and everything's grouped together perfectly. That's how we start it. As we group them together, it tends to give them a better shot. But once they start filling in, we're okay with that. We also look at it as what's a good aggressive native. I like aggressive natives. We will probably be putting some petunias out there, wild petunias, because I really like wild petunias. They fight the weeds. They're a native. If they survive, we're going to be pretty happy. And they seed like crazy. So I've got a bunch that have reseeded over at the Nature Center that we can pull over and see. If those survive, we'll move on with it. Another thing that I'm going to point out, and then I'll shut up. One of the big, I don't know, I'm nature people, I don't use like fancy words and stuff, but I guess if you wanted to call it like an initiative that the Park District has, we have an environmental committee, and just like everybody else, you know, we're working for pollinators or monarchs. Who asked about what's the difference between a rain garden? If you ask me, it's marketing. If I want you to put something in your yard, a rain garden sounds a whole lot better than a
Bioinfiltration.
Yeah, rain garden, that's beautiful. I want one of those. Monarchs, everybody loves the monarchs. Yes, the plight is real. Their numbers are going down, but that's the poster child. Ma'am, would you like to grow stuff for monarchs? Or how about bees? How about some wasps? Let's bring some wasps in there. So we're doing monarch gardens, monarch way stations, and pollinator pockets. This gets to get a pollinator pocket sign because there's a ton of pollinators that are going to visit this. When I first started, that was a drawback. I was all like, let's put in bee balm. This is a recreation area. All the kids are going to get stung. I haven't heard one scream today yet, and there's a ton of them over there. So there, in addition to your groundwater and your water resources and all of that, it's also providing habitat, and that's something that we can't forget about, and it's an opportunity for municipalities especially to be a cheerleader for that. So trust me, you can talk to my boss, any of the bosses I've had. I'm nature people, leave me alone, I'm the weird kid out in the woods, just let me do my thing. And they're all in marketing, oh, you got to tell people what you're doing. So, like I said, we're having signs made. We're going to put that up. After 23 years, they finally beat it into me. Hey, here's a good opportunity to kind of sell these.
Are you a Bee City USA?
A what?
Bee City USA
I
affiliate?
don't believe we are, but City of Crystal,
You should. They would love it.
City of Crystal Lake signed the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. The Park District also signed, so we've taken the Mayor's Monarch Pledge. We are taking part next month through the Nature Center in Pollinator Bio Blitz that's being organized through the National Park and Rec Association. So yeah, it's pretty fun.
Bee City USA.
Yeah.
We have it on our signs in Fort Meredith.
Do you really?
Bee City and a Tree City.
So we, at the Nature Center,
Tiny little village.
At the Nature Center, we do have an observation beehive, which is pretty cool, and we're able to show that. And then we have a butterfly house, and we're able to kind of work with that as well.
You've got your curb cuts. So this is allowing water from the parking lot to come in and enter the garden. The stone here is here, we refer to this as energy dissipation. So the water kind of rushes off the flat surface fast, and we don't want to create scouring as the water comes in. So the rock slows down the water, it absorbs that energy, and then it fills in this depression. So there is a concave depression here, and the water will pond until it reaches this height. So this is holding a lot of the water and won't let it drain out until it gets to this height. And the water that comes in first is the one that's carrying all the pollutants. So Brian referred to that as the first flush. So that's what we commonly refer to it as. The first flush of rain brings in the dirty pollutants, and that allows it to settle out. The water that comes in after that and rises up this high is actually pretty clean. And so this is doing its job. It's still, water comes into here and then it goes out to the storm sewer. But it is allowing all the pollutants to settle out, and as that goes down, that is being treated. So the water coming out of here is really pretty clean.
Storm sewer outlet to?
Sorry, say again?
Where does the storm sewer outlet to?
So the storm sewer outlets into the pond. So into Woods Creek, and then Woods Creek goes out to Fox River. And so all these are intertwined. The Fox River, we don't use it for drinking water here in McHenry County, but the Fox River is the main source of water for Elgin and Aurora. And so, you know, our contribution has impacts on our neighbors. And I'm a great believer in personal responsibility, and I do think that that's one of the reasons why we have a responsibility to do these things. So there's a cost to this, and like I said, you really need to look at what the benefits of the project are when you're evaluating these costs. But one of them is you're responsible. This wouldn't be polluted unless you had put this here. So you have to take responsibility for cleaning the water that you are essentially creating a problem for. So, you know, all these reasons should be evaluated when you're deciding whether or not to do a project like this. But you've got your native plants in here, and it's providing a multitude of functions. So let's go, and so this ties into the storm sewer, which runs somewhat north and south. What's that?
So the one thing I wanted you to see as we're walking around this, you can see it from here. Wave, John. We've got shrubs here. They're great, I love shrubs, but look what's on the ground underneath them. Nothing. Most of what's going to grow in here is going to need full sun. That's why I'm not a fan of trees in here or shrubs. Plus, once I get to burn this, I'm probably going to kill those. It's just going to happen.
Well, and then you can also see the exposed plastic here.
Yeah,
so that's a good learning lesson for all of us. You know, maybe the underground portion can be plastic, but the exposed area, we should have the forethought in the future to put metal pipes so we don't have that restriction for maintenance. So this is the main rain garden here, and the first time I pulled up, I think I was out on a bike ride. The first time I rode up here and saw this, I was just floored. The floristic quality of this, the diversity of species in here, really is pretty spectacular. You know, I didn't know it was a rain garden really until I started looking at it and realizing it's getting flow from the parking lot down into it. But I just thought this was a great example because it's providing such aesthetic beauty. This is a landscape feature, even if you didn't have all these other benefits that were being derived. But this is providing all those benefits. So a lot of these species, you've got iris and all these other things in here that wouldn't be able to be here unless you had a fairly consistent water source. And so this is getting runoff from the parking lot as well as from the splash pad. So water from the splash pad comes through a pipe out over here and then discharges up gradient. And so water then has to flow down through the system before it outlets to the storm sewer system. And so it's providing an asset over there for recreational purposes, and then it's providing an asset over here by maintaining good quality vegetation, and then it's also getting cleaned as it passes through before leaving out to the Woods Creek. It's also infiltrating down. This is a true infiltration type of system where it is infiltrating down, recharging our groundwater, and it's providing just wonderful wildlife habitat. I guess, John, as far as you know, this was a nice manicured system when you first planted it, but things move. I refer to that as being wild and woolly, and it's you know, doing what it's supposed to. You know, things don't stay in place in nature, you know, I think this is just a great example of a naturalized system that's providing a multitude of benefits. I guess, is there something you want to add to this?
Yeah, just the couple of things I would point out. One, I don't know where Valerie, how many days have you had crews out here working in this year?
This year,
Yeah.
we've put about 52 hours in total.
So about 52 hours
Most
during
of that
the,
was this week.
right. Yeah, we had to pretty up. We got company, you know. But about 52 hours working in here. A landscape bed like this that's manicured takes considerably more. The other one I wanted to ask, who can spot the weed? There's one big clump like way over that way.
There's a little right here too.
Huh? Yeah, there's another one. It's more obvious. That's not going to take over. Yeah, it's weed. It's a weed. It's not necessarily a great one. This is canary reed grass. So this is one that we're going to end up having to come in and herbiciding. And we'll hand wick. So big rubber glove, cloth glove, herbicide on glove. That way we don't kill off everything else. Keep in mind, there's water moving through here. So if you're used to doing public or you're private, you wouldn't necessarily know about it. We're a public agency. We have to have an Illinois pesticide license. This, in my opinion, falls under aquatic. So we're going to use an herbicide that's approved for aquatic use. Just in the off chance we don't want to contaminate anything out there. The likelihood of it happens, slim to none, but why risk it? You know, water's pretty important for us. So,
well, and there are different techniques. So it looks like maybe you did this here, but we've got two native demonstration gardens at the county administration building. If you haven't visited them, I highly recommend it. It's really a great example of a native garden in a public space. When they planted it about 12 years ago, they did put in species that are native, but are aggressive, and really shouldn't have been planted in a small environment like they are. You know, I'm going in, I'm letting them start to flower because they're pretty, but then I go in and cut the flower heads off before they go to seed. So I'm preventing the spread. You know, that's just a way of kind of managing at very low cost. So there are different types of techniques that you can use depending on your manpower, your budget, and your energy level. But at our native gardens, the only real maintenance that we do is early spring. Our general landscaper, so nobody with any real native skills, comes in and weed whacks it and removes the duff from the previous year. That's emulating a burn. As much as I would like it, the county's not going to let me burn right next to the county administration building. That is you know, the way that it's being managed. But that's one visit a year. Now I go in and you know, I'll be you know, bothered by something I see, so I'm just being you know, overly pushy with these things. But you know, that's me just picking around during lunch. You know, whereas our turf grass is being mowed every single week. So the cost to the county for our native garden is almost nothing. You know, it got established well. and it has been maintained well, and therefore the maintenance on it is almost nothing. And so these systems, when planted right, really can hold their own. And but part of it is trial and error. So a lot of the things that were in the initial mix probably were not the best suited for this site. And if it had been a better mix, maybe the maintenance on this would be a lot easier. So it is really important to have a qualified company do the initial mix design, or at least be thoughtful in putting your mix together if it's a smaller project that you're doing yourself, because that'll make all the difference in your ability to maintain it. And you know, I talked about the fact that they're taking something that would otherwise be a waste product. You know, so after they use the water, it would just go into the storm drain and be treated like a waste product. Here, it's being treated as an asset and reused for a second time and then being treated. You know, you look for those opportunities. One of the greatest examples of this that I know of, and this kind of ties into the thermal pollution discussion that we were having. Holland, Michigan is a charming little town up in Michigan. It's got like a nice boutique downtown shopping district. And they have a power plant that was polluting their river with thermal pollution and was in violation of their EPA permit. And somebody put two and two together and said, hey, we need to redo the roads in our nice little boutique shopping district. Why don't we run the runoff from the treatment plant that's having the violations with hot water, run it through pipes underneath the road and sidewalks, and that'll melt the snow in the wintertime, and it'll cool our water before we discharge it. So it's, you know, looking for those opportunities created this opportunity to solve one problem while also solving another problem in the city. So now the city's streets and sidewalks naturally melt the snow because of the water that's being piped from the wastewater or from the power plant. So they're not having to salt the roads and sidewalks hardly at all. Shopping revenues are way up because people are more willing to go into the city because they don't have to step through snow. Maintenance costs have gone down. So it's just looking for those opportunities and thinking outside the box and understanding the systems well enough to look for those types of opportunities. And this is once again an example of that, where they saw somebody had the foresight to see the opportunity with this type of a system. And you know, I guess I did the same thing with my brother's rain garden, now that I think about it, because he had a problem with his sump pump, and we used the rain garden to solve his sump pump problem. And the sump pump provides the water to, you know, create this wonderful land feature that is now the centerpiece of their property. So I think, you know, as we learn more and more about these things, flatten that learning curve, all of us will be much more adept at recognizing these potential opportunities and being able to verbalize them and make things happen. Our September 15th program will be another kind of demonstration project. So our Division of Transportation, one of their young field crew would be out there mowing and wondering why we're mowing this couple acres of land every week. Why don't we plant this as native? So he made a suggestion to his superiors, and then I worked with them to help them get a grant, and then they have just completely run with it. So we've designed a project where they're converting turf grass to native, and they've hired a consulting firm, so actually Jeremy's company, Hay & Associates, and they are using this as a training opportunity for the McHenry County Division of Transportation staff. So every step of the way, their restoration ecologist is meeting with them out there to show how they clear the land first, because you go in and first herbicide the vegetation you want to replace, and then you go in and you plant your plants, you put erosion control fabric down, and then, you know, every step of the way our staff are learning how to do it right from a professional, ultimately with the goal of integrating more and more best management practices and green infrastructure into our roadways, and ultimately planting more and more right-of-ways with native vegetation, and being able to do a bulk of this work in-house. And so it's just a great opportunity. What we're going to be focusing on there, though, is the interim stage of development. Because with native gardens, it's not like flipping a switch. You can't neglect land for 50 years and then expect to flip a switch and have native prairie. There's a transition period. Typically, we're looking at like 3 to 5 years before it's really an established prairie. Now, with native plants, I mentioned that they're deep-rooted. So the first year or two, all the energy of native plants are being spent putting their roots underground. And it really isn't until the 3rd year that it starts to look like a prairie. And then the 4th and 5th year, it starts really becoming something you would recognize as a prairie. But there's this interim stage, and you really need to go into a project like this understanding that it's not going to be instant prairie. And so we'll be looking at this project in the interim stage and get a better understanding of what was there before, where we're at now, and what it's going to be. So I really think it's an important learning opportunity for us to physically see these things so that we can manage our own expectations and communicate that with our constituents. So that'll be September 15th. It's going to be really limited. I think we're going to max it out at 20 people. So if it's something you're interested in, I highly recommend signing up early. Then we'll have a green infrastructure program, or excuse me, a green building program in October, and then a salt smart program in November. So please sign up for those. I really appreciate everybody coming out and all the work everybody's doing. I mean, just with our group today, we had a lot of people represented doing great things in their communities, and it just fills me with hope for the future seeing these things. So thank you all for coming out, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Thank you.